Welcome to a special video edition of Bill on Bankruptcy. I am Bill Rochelle, ABI's editor-at-large, and for the next few minutes we're going to be talking with Esben Christensen. Esben is a native of Denmark, now a managing director with Alex Partners. He is, among other things, a summa cum laude graduate of Montclair Slate University in economics. Danes, as they often are involved in the shipping industry, and that's what we're going to talk about, because Mr. Christensen is heavily involved in advising both owners as well as lenders in the maritime business. And I've got this question for you, Mr. Christensen. The world economy is pretty good now. So why is it that we are seeing maritime bankruptcies?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of people are scratching their heads a little bit about that, but I think you really have to go back to some of the root causes for what got us in this mess in the first place, at least from the maritime space. And it really started...
Oh, because it used to be that not much happened in terms of maritime bankruptcies.
Yeah, so maritime...
Going back 20 years or so.
Maritime really used to be a very closed-off business. It was very driven by a very close relationship with very fragmented group of ship owners, a lot of them outside the United States, and a relatively small group of relationship banks. And they really did transactions together with very little involvement from
some Scandinavian banks, Greek banks, and
lots of European banks.
Yeah.
Actually very geographically based ship owners in Europe really dealt with European banks, and in Asia with Asian banks and so forth.
Right.
And so
what did they do wrong? What happened?
Ship owners are, if you've met some or you know some, are very aggressive, optimistic people, and life was very good leading up to 2008. And
2008, I remember that
yeah,
year.
Exactly, that fateful year. Finance was cheap, and shipyards in China pumped out a lot of ships, and nobody really anticipated what was going to happen in 2008. So you had a real perfect storm where demand collapsed, and you had a long lead time order book that was really geared towards a completely different market, and that's sort of really what did the initial shock, if you will.
So have we overcome that problem?
So one of the things that's interesting here is the short answer is we're improving on some of the blue water segments, but it's taken a very long time, even after the economy started picking up. And why is that? One of the things that we saw, at least as advisors to the shipping industry, is that when asset values plummeted in the years following 2008 and ship owners started getting into distress, it really opened up that market for alternative investors like hedge funds and private equity.
Okay, yes. People who had not theretofore been involved with maritime lending, I guess.
It was really a new sector for most, and an intriguing one. You had asset values that had fallen in some cases by 40, 60%, and ship owners that were adamant that this was a 2-3 year problem. So there was a lot of people that thought that there was a chance to make a quick buck here. And that really fueled a lot of new investment and continued expansion of the fleet.
I see. So then, were there other problems in later years?
So I think shipping is also a collection of different segments. And we saw some of the commodity segments get hurt first.
Such as
dry bulk and tankers.
Yeah.
And that kept a lot of the restructuring professionals busy for the first few years. After that, we really saw a little bit of a different sector start getting very distressed, and that was the container space. And the container space is different because, unlike the dry bulks and the tanker ships, there's a lot of operational leverage in container ships, right? You're shipping small parcels for multiple people. Yeah. And so the scale benefits were quite intriguing. So what we really saw in container was a race to get bigger, faster. And that really fueled sort of a secondary crisis in that space that was not only driven by trade, but also driven by a change in the fleet composition, where certain classes of assets just became not attractive.
I see. And then I guess we had a collapse in oil prices, huh? Who got hurt there?
Just as we started getting a little bit out of the woods, if you will, on some of the shipping sectors, oil price collapsed in 2014, and that really was the start of what we are seeing now. You know, I think if you poll most restructuring firms now, one of the sectors they're busy with is offshore.
And when you say offshore, are there segments of the offshore business that ran into trouble?
So I think now we're seeing all of the segments being in real trouble.
Who had the first trouble?
I think
where was the first trouble?
First were really the exploration side, because what happened.
You mean owners of offshore rigs?
Yes, yeah. Because when you look at the cost of oil, cost of extracting oil, you know, offshore, the deeper the water, the more expensive it is.
Yeah.
And so for the oil companies, the first to go were the deep sea drillers. And they happen to be a very similar owner group as some of the blue ocean ship owners. A lot of those guys had subsequently invested in offshore.
Oh, really?
And so really you saw a double whammy to some extent.
And what segments of the oil industry offshore came into trouble later?
So now what we're seeing is the drillers are still in trouble, but they're making their way through the restructuring system. And now we're really starting to see a lot of the support companies, so the OSV owners, right, the offshore support vessel owners, the seismic operators that map the seabed for potential discoveries, and all the way to the oil field services companies that are supplying the valves for the BOPs and the wells and so forth. It really is a total, if you will, collapse in the whole ecosystem that we're dealing with at the moment.
No dear. Well, you know, one of the things that I've noticed ever since the first problems back after 2008 was what people are calling bankruptcy tourism.
Yeah.
Where, you know, a company that's based in Greece or in Asia comes to the U.S. or somewhere else that has no connections. Is that a phenomenon that's going to continue as far as you know?
So I think we're still seeing some of that, and it's interesting. We have actually we have a panel tomorrow that's dealing with the maritime sector that I'm moderating. It's a great panel, and one of the things we will be talking about there is this exact issue. And what we saw on the blue water side were a lot of ship owners seeking protection in the United States with traditional bank debt.
Now, is that the only place that foreign folks are going these days, the U.S. or any other countries?
The U.S. is still the most predominant, but in the offshore space, we are seeing some of the offshore owners who are incorporated in the Caymans and some of the UK jurisdictions using the scheme of arrangement process. And so to some extent, there's some shopping there.
If I recall, there was a bankruptcy court decision recently that said that reincorporating in the Caymans, if it's intended to avoid liquidation, is a good thing to do.
Yeah. And we've seen some successful, well, the makings of some successful restructurings in that jurisdiction. And I think we might see more of those.
And you know, I think I've also seen that Singapore is trying to get into the bankruptcy tourism business in a big way.
Singapore is an interesting geography. You know, like most things that Singapore do, when they set their mind to do something, they do their homework, and they've been spending a lot of time canvassing what really works in Chapter 11 and what really works in other jurisdictions, and are setting up what could be a very robust system there. And that makes sense because Asian restructurings, you know, each geography has its own cultural differences.
Now, will Singapore, like the U.S., claim that they have power to enforce a restructuring all around the world?
That's my understanding, that they will try to deploy that power, because it's one of the most powerful pieces from a ship owning perspective, for sure. With Chapter 11, this idea that you can enjoin your creditors from enforcing.
Well, that's very interesting. So, Esben, that sounds to me as though Delaware and New York have some competition from the other side of the world. And you know, competition is good for everybody, so maybe that'll be good for New York and Delaware and some other venues in the U.S. Mr. Christensen, I thank you very much for your time. This has been a very enlightening discussion about maritime bankruptcy, because, you know, right now in the U.S. we're really focusing on the fallout in, well, oil and gas, of course,
sure,
and retail. But it's nice to know about these big dollar problems in maritime, and I thank you very much.
My pleasure. It was a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you for spending your time. We appreciate it, and don't work too hard.
Thank you.